Good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 85. As always, I'm going to start us off with you. I do that every bloody week, honestly. I swear I do. Oh, no. I'm sorry, gents. I do that every damn week. Right, where are we? This one. Okay, that was the Wellington March. The reason I played that one, which is a British military march, is because I was just on the stream. I will put a link to in the description, which was actually about the Duke of Wellington. So you can go and check that out. Okay, guys, welcome to my guests, and I actually have some this week. So, first of all, to Mitch. How are you going, Mitch?
Doing same old.
Good on you, mate. Rupert August, how are you going?
Doing well. Finally getting back here, which is always nice.
And my co-host, Armin. How are you going, mate?
Yeah, could you?
Yeah, not bad, mate. Not bad. All right. I will, as usual, open things up to people who are guests in the chat to guests on the show who would have something in particular to bring up. Who has the first one they'd like to bring up?
I've got an article.
Go on then, mate. Go on.
Well, there's not really much to it. It's by a site called The Morning Consultant. And the headline reads, US conservatives are uniquely inclined towards right-wing authoritarianism compared to their Western peers. I'll actually put that in the chat. But it's obviously, I mean, they're using Bob Altmaier or Altmaier's right-wing authoritarianism scale, which is obviously it's obviously very, very, very slanted.
Yes,
I think the scale literally defines itself as like they believed that what was it that there was like that within right wingers there was like that they would act aggressively in the name of their authority of their sort of authorities, and they were conformist in thought and nature or something, which is sort of, you've only got to look at the sort of put some of the sort of attempts on various senators or congressmen or Supreme Court judges' lives to see that it's almost kind of the inverse of reality. But obviously they use this as a scale to paint their enemies. One of the things I found was quite interesting is the
projection in that.
Oh yeah, tons.
I mean,
one of the things I found was quite interesting is that like the UK
guys
is
are
like,
not. Right, I was just going to say, right-wing people are mostly not conformist. The conformist guys are the lefty woke types.
Yeah, 100%. And partly because they're the guys in charge. They're just simping for their establishment. I think George has called it right in the comments. But I mean, it's kind of interesting when you look at it, because by quite a few of the metrics, the UK is like second highest. But they essentially, I mean, one of the things I found quite interesting about it is it shows that, especially when you look at some of the graphs in there, especially by age, it shows that there's a bit of an edge now among the right in America that there wasn't maybe sort of 10 to 20 years ago. There's a bit of a bite to the boomer cons now. What do some people used to refer to them as, the boomer waffen? Like there's definitely something to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to understate just how politically activated quite a lot of them are, just because if you pay attention to the mainstream, as we've been so used to, you would think that not that much has changed. But what has changed perhaps is the extent to which people are paying more attention to alternative news sources. So the amount of people who are listening to what's his name, Steve Bannon's War Room podcast, or some of the various other podcasts. Like I think Jack Posobiec has one, like a current affairs podcast, and obviously Infowars and things like that are just talking in completely different ways to the acceptable mainstream. So that a lot of people now are like, a lot of boomers even are to the right of Fox News, which Fox News with a big bad like far right extremists as of as of like 10 or 12 years ago or something.
Yeah, but even some of the people on Fox, like especially Tucker Carlson, have moved right, especially sort of more recently in the last sort of 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, in a lot of ways.
You got anything to add to that, Mitch?
On the issue of like right-wing authoritarianism, I'm thinking, I mean, I don't really go in for labels like that as I used to. Like, I just pragmatic. I just generally think our authoritarianism, let's face it, when it boils down to it, our authoritarianism would be a far superior option to what we got now. Like, even if, well, let's say for argument's sake, you had, I don't know, Nigel Farage. Let's say he went like Lord Protector 2.0 and just cancelled all elections and what have you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what, like, I don't really buy into this whole, like, I can remember when I was in A-level psychology, like, you have this whole people who score high for psychopathy tend to correlate more with right-wing authoritarianism and all this. So I tend to agree it's a big psyop.
And it started not long after World War II, didn't it? What was that infamous book? that was looking at Nazi psychology, supposedly, written by some small-haired person. Although I'm not particularly into that, by the way, I'm not. But this was a fact. And they just tried to portray, all the people who were Nazis were right wing and pro straight white men and all this nonsense. The authoritarian personality, that is the one I'm thinking of, Steve, I believe. And that was published not long after World War II. And absolutely, it was a psyop, and it was done deliberately. It really was.
Well, the thing is, because I was talking about this with a friend not long before coming on the stream, and I looked up the right-wing authoritarianism scale, and of course it was just a revised version of earlier work by Adorno, and I was trying to remember if it was Adorno or it was one of the other Frankfurt School guys that Gottfried mentions in that book, Fascism: A Career of a Concept.
Which is an excellent book, by the way.
Yeah, it's a very good book. People should read it. Very, very red pilling. And I just searched Adorno on the PDF of that book, and it came up with like 70 mentions. And I was scanning through some of them. And after reading some of those passages, I went back to read this article, and it was almost as if I was still reading like the comments and quotes of Adorno. It's quite blatantly, it's quite blatantly trying to sort of draw a very, very kind of disgustingly slanted narrative.
Yeah,
but I think it still reveals certain things. That it doesn't mean to, like showing that there is actually a bit of a reversal trend, or there is a bit of a more dissonant attitude emerging in the right wing.
100%. I just wanted to point out that George has corrected me in the chat, and the book came out in the 60s. I thought it was earlier than that, but I will take George's word for it because he's into that kind of stuff. So
I'm pretty sure a lot of that strain of thinking goes back to the interwar years, though, when psychology was also done, I think, and there were the attempts to pathologize and counter the accepted pathologies of the right and the left, respectively. So everything that is left wing is moved from the sickness position into the completely normal position, and meanwhile everything that is associated with anyone who might be normal is moved into the pathology position and needs to be.
It's like Rupert. Today we have toxic masculinity, but we certainly don't have any sort of toxic femininity, do we?
Well, yes, exactly.
I wonder why. It's like, you think like humans being all the same and all equal and all the rest of it, there would be ups and downs on both sides, but apparently not.
But psychology has always been prone to this kind of thing, because the definition of normalcy is just a group of people in a room, like a board of practitioners, I think, for some government bodies, I think, that basically just determine what is a disorder and what is within the normal acceptable amount of or level of human experience, basically. Hence why was it sexual dimorphism, or no, not dimorphism, sexual. What's the one that's associated with trans? The dysphoria.
The opposite of dysphoria.
Yeah, that's it. So sexual dysphoria is not a disorder, whereas body integrity dysphoria is a disorder.
Yeah. And like enormously fat people are still healthy.
And for anyone who's
somehow.
Yeah. And for anyone who's unaware, body integrity dysmorphia is where somebody feels like they should be disabled, basically. So they will often try to basically change their body to reflect how they feel they ought to be.
So you're talking about these people who think that they maybe should lose an arm or a leg or something like that. Yeah.
Or there was one particularly egregious example where a woman thought that she should be blind, so she had her psychologist help to pour bleach in her eyes.
Wow, what a great doctor!
Yeah.
Wow. Jeez, I don't know. I don't even know how to respond to that. It's so insane, to be honest.
I mean, when you look at that sort of stuff, you understand why hunter-gatherer societies often purge the mentally ill and the psychopaths early on.
Yep. Yep. Could I just point out to people in the chat that Mitch's avatar is a German Shepherd dog belonging to the Finnish army in World War II, and they've dressed him up as a joke. All right, nothing bad was done to that dog. It's just a soldier's joke. But he was probably utterly spoiled, because soldiers tend to spoil dogs.
Well, compared to Russian dogs, it must have felt a lifetime.
Yeah, like the Finnish didn't use dogs to carry mines under German tanks, unlike the Russians, sadly, in World War II. Or the Soviets, more accurately, but yeah.
I'm sure they make good little ammo carriers like Wojtek.
Oh, look, all armies use dogs in World War II, but like not for suicide missions, you know.
Well, yes.
The British dogs used to get medals when they did brave stuff, which they often did. But you know,
Then again, as I recall, if that actually happened, I feel like as I recall, the end of that story is the whole training the Soviet dogs to run under tanks with mines strapped to their backs. Supposedly, they trained them to go under Russian tanks, and so they just ran straight under T-34s and things when they were let loose.
yeah, which is sad for the doggies, really.
That is very sad.
It is, because like I like dogs. Dogs are good. Unlike many humans, dogs are almost invariably good. Like if you have a bad dog, that's almost always because the dog has had a bad owner. Dogs are like love on a lead, basically. You treat them reasonably is all you have to do, and they'll save you because they're little canine heroes waiting to be heroes. That's always how dogs are.
Well, it really depends. It can depend on the breed. You know, one breed in particular being bred to be a murder machine.
Yeah.
No, all dogs are good. Sorry, all dogs are good.
Well, I mean, pit bulls have their moments.
Well, yeah, but even that, you've got to look at the people who own them, don't you?
Maybe,
extent,
but
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
there's
Look-
also
look-
a
look-
huge correlation between what they've been bred for.
Look at the people who own them, though, honestly. That's the big deal.
Well, tiny percentage of the dog population, massive percentage. I think outright majority of all the attacks on humans.
Yeah, even greater than 1350, I've heard.
Yeah, I think so.
I have been exposed to this meme, George, but I think it's mostly the people who own them, and I like all dogs and a fair number of people, and I'm never going to change on that because I've known so many dogs.
Well, skinny 5 foot nothing woman attacked by her loving cute little fuzzball pit bull is a very common occurrence, sadly. So I don't know that it's.
Well, I don't see that. I don't see that sort of thing very often, unless it was actually her boyfriend's pit bull. But and they are not very wild. But that's just me. That's just me, and I could be wrong.
I mean, we mentioned Soviet dogs and 5 foot women. I mean, you reckon that 4'9" mestizo class commander woman from that video I posted, you reckon she's going to get attacked by Soviet Russian suicide dogs or something?
I don't know. I reckon if you looked at the statistics, a lot more women and kids have been saved by dogs than attacked by them. A lot more.
Yeah, don't doubt that.
I mean, I always like not only me, but my father, all of his family, everyone. All like if you were going to send a kid out at night or a woman out at night, we always thought it was much safer if you took the dog with them. Always. Because for one thing, most of these cowardly wanks who attack people randomly would prefer them not to have a dog. So and there are, like, you can go on YouTube and you can find umpteen videos of dogs saving women and children from being attacked, and also blokes as well. So yeah, that's it. Did you have anything to add to that one?
No. I just thought it was a bit of an interesting article. It's kind of like in their own words, but there's other things you can sort of team out of the data. That,
Well, I got something we can tie that into a bit, but I'm going to ask the other two dudes if they have other things they want to bring up first. Firstly, Rupert, do you have anything you would like to bring up as a first subject?
I suppose it's not the most Commonwealth related, but one of my repeating subjects of study is like revolutions, and usually the Russian and French revolutions in particular. So just been getting more into some of the details about the early Soviet government and sort of what they were all about, and in combination with comparing that against the late Tsarist government, and yeah, that's pretty depressing stuff. It's pretty shocking just how poorly the Soviets responded, and the exact sort of circumstances that led to their ascension are quite enlightening, because basically what you get in the later stages, pretty much after the February Revolution, is basically everybody just becomes apathetic. It seems to be the general consensus is almost nobody is actually getting involved in happenings on the ground. So it's not like some great rising up of masses of people to throw off the shackles of their oppressors or anything. Barely any of the soldiers are even getting involved. So you have garrisons all over the place that are just happily sitting in their barracks, because the only people who care to be involved at all are the ones who are either loyal to the provisional government or loyal to the Bolsheviks. And it just so happens that they have about one or two really loyal units that'll back them to the hilt, and that's why the Bolsheviks end up coming out on top, despite the fact that almost nobody likes them.
Yeah, I mean isn't that a pretty common routine that these things go through?
It is to an extent, but I think if you compare it to something like the American Revolution, for example, there seems to be a lot more active involvement. So when you're talking about the American revolutionaries, you're really talking about, especially at the start, a fairly small cadre of people who are actually dedicated to the cause of American independence, and will basically do that through a screen of any amount of like nonsense justifications, about like almost non-existent taxes on luxuries that they don't actually have to buy if they don't want to. The actual enforcing of the law, which they are in theory in favor of, but in practice they are, trying to. They're basically smugglers trying to avoid being caught. What else? All this kind of stuff. But ultimately, in the later stages, you have much more mass involvement. And I guess you could say by the time you get to the Russian Civil War kind of time, you have much more mass involvement then as well. But it's conscription. It's both sides conscripting the populations and sort of much more forcing everybody to be involved. Whereas you have that giant period in the middle where there's attempted coups and counter coups and all that kind of thing, where the vast majority of people seem to be doing basically nothing, just trying to get on with whatever it is they can, whilst they have the opportunity to.
Yeah, I mean, the Bolsheviks basically swept to power on mass apathy anyway. But
yes.
I mean, obviously the conscription thing, that largely comes down to like the systems that those people were governed under. I suppose I'll put it that way.
It's also a situation where they crashed the economy so completely that the only thing that a lot of people could do was to join the army in order to be able to feed themselves.
Yeah.
Industrial output, like going. So between something like, I think it was 1914 and like 1920, industrial production, industrial output was down to 20% of what it had been.
Bloody
hell. I'm sure that's right, Rupert. But wasn't it also true, like the Russians had enormous casualties in World War One up until 1917? And although they'd had some successes, they had a lot of losses in latter period as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty bad, but I guess part of the issue is that if you make the argument, as some people do, that people were angry about the conduct of the war, and it not being managed as well as it could be, well, what they get afterwards is even worse. Because if you were a Russian patriot and you were annoyed that you didn't think the Tsar was doing as good of a job as he should at managing the war, and then you get the provisional government who fails so completely that half of the army just collapses in the field and retreats, basically into, like, the army just disintegrates, basically, and then the Bolsheviks come to power and they disintegrate the army and the situation on the front and even the truce so badly that the Germans are just hopping on trains, going from station to station, hopping off, disarming the local garrisons, and then carrying on down the track. There was completely nothing in the way of them at all. So the Germans were able to dictate whatever terms they desired, and they basically did.
Yeah, that treaty in 1917 was extremely harsh. Mitch, you're the only guy on here who speaks Russian. What's your opinion about Russia in 1914 up to 1917? So,
I look at, like, Russia before the First World War actually was looking quite good for its future. Like, apparently it's like in 1910, like the 300th anniversary of the Romanovs coming in. The economy was doing so well, industrializing so quick, but the Germans were even saying by 1917 Russia would be unbeatable, and that had things continued the way they were, Russia would actually be the rival to Britain in the long term, as opposed to Germany or America. Some people have said. So,
incidentally, that basically was the case. By the time you get to 1917, the Russia's domestic needs for armaments and such in particular are far outstripping their immediate needs. So they are able to raise new units to conduct new offensives and open up new fronts, which no one else was capable of doing. Everyone else was just moving existing pieces around the chessboard to try and stabilize things as best they could or get an advantage in one tiny little front. Russia was actually fully capable of opening up new fronts and deploying there en masse. And they still had plenty of money in the bank, so that it was a prize to be fought over by the time you get to the Civil War. Compare that against the Russia's conduct in World War II, for example, and they almost immediately have to go cap in hand to the West. And at the moment that there's a suggestion that Lend-Lease will be toned down, they squeal and basically say, no, well, like, whatever it takes, we need Lend-Lease. Don't cut that off. We don't care how long it takes you to organize a second front, another front in the West. Like, we need Lend-Lease more than that. So, yeah, it's basically incomparable, I would say. The extent to which Russia was better managed and organized in World War I is pretty unbelievable, I found.
Okay. I take your point entirely, Rupert. But Russia then, of course, never ever paid back any of that Lend-Lease stuff. But why would they? They were communists. But having said that, so and listening to what Mitch was just saying about the ability of the Russians to put more troops into places and all the rest of it. So what the bloody hell went wrong then? Is what I'd ask you.
In the case of the Battle of Tannenberg, there were two Russian generals, one called Rennenkampf. I can't remember the name of the second one, but they both quarreled against one another, so they never worked together. And so the Germans just smashed one army and then smashed the other and did a classic defeat in detail. That's one of the main problems the Russians had, was poor leadership.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
That's one thing you'll get about Russian history is poor leadership a lot.
Well, that's the meme, but that's Soviet historiography. They had some amazing generals in on the white side in the Russian Civil War, and those guys didn't just come out of nowhere. It's just harder to hide their achievements, because those guys are still fighting on the in World War I, obviously, but the Soviet historiography has done a pretty good job of burying how good they were.
Yeah, that's his name, Samsonov. Essentially, those two hated each other over a quarrel in the Japanese War back in 1909. back in 1905. So when Battle of Tannenberg came, the Germans just smashed them because the two generals hated one another.
Yeah.
Then you get
so defeating DL, like you were saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Then you have other generals like Yudenich. He was actually quite damn good general in the Caucasus region against the Ottomans. Like the thing about the Russians in World War One was they did quite well against the Austrians and the Ottomans. It was only against the Germans they couldn't beat. That was the main issue. Like I look at I'll also say points of with Russians, they look at the 20th century in like a weird way that is baffling to the Westerners. In that, on one hand, they like their Tsarist history, but then they also admire the Soviet history as well. Like, so for example, they might be anti-communist, but even then, they'll also have a nostalgia for the Soviet Union in some ways.
I've seen that a lot. Yeah, the Russian, I know, understandably, like Russia used to be probably the second most powerful nation in the world, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, the Soviet Union was fundamentally anti-Russian. So, for example, you have Khrushchev, who gave away Crimea to Ukraine, even though the Russians were saying, "Look, don't do this. Crimea is our territory, not Ukraine." Or you'd have like situations where, so for example, the Russian economy collapsed after the collapse of the Soviet Union because you had supply chains that flowed between the different independent republics. So, for example, you take a city like Chelyabinsk in Siberia. They had supply chains for their industry coming from Kazakhstan. So Kazakhstan goes independent, and those supply chains are gone. So cities like Chelyabinsk go completely post-industrial overnight.
Yeah.
But on one hand, like you get Russians who say, "Oh well, we love the Soviet Union because it has a sense of brotherhood and common struggle with all manner of peoples like the Baltics, other Slavs, Central Asians." But if you talk to Russians today and ask them what they think about Central Asians, they think about them in the same way that we think about Pakistanis. Put it that way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I reckon we probably think about Pakistanis worse than that, if we're honest. But there we go.
Yeah, it's like you get Dugin who tries to say to like Orthodox Russians that we have some sort of unique brotherhood with like Tajiks and Uzbeks. But then you go to Moscow, Tajiks and Uzbeks are overwhelmingly doing all the petty crime in Moscow. So it's one of those things where, on one hand, with Russia, it's kind of like run in a similar way to like a multicultural empire because you got I think 200 different ethnicities and whatnot. That's like why in terms of Russia, for example, they can be quite based in some ways, but what we would see is cooked in other ways. Like you'll get for example, pandering about diversity in a similar way to how our politicians do it, but with their diversity, it's not done the same way as ours because ours is done through mass immigration. Theirs was done because they conquered the lands of those people.
Yeah. In a lot of ways,
though, in a lot of ways, it does have more in common with less an empire. People like to use that term in regards to like a multicultural empire. People like to use that term in regards to Russia, but it's like in a lot of ways, it's really not that different to what we have in the sense of it being multicultural. So they even had the whole propaganda thing going on with, and this is even during the late USSR, I think, where you have a celebration of all the different cultures and like the regional dresses. So you have like a picture of all the different peoples of Russia and all of their national dresses, and then you portray the Russian in just like standard suit or standard like Western attire because they don't actually have a proper culture. They're just the standard basically. And everybody else, including the Ukrainians and Belarusians and such, they have their own like unique ancient traditional culture, but not the Russians.
Adam, what's your opinion on this stuff? Because like these guys know more about it than I do, and I'm wondering what you think about it.
It's definitely not my field, but yeah, no, it's. I mean, didn't Putin recently do like the I'm Chechen, I'm this, I'm that sort of speech that you'd hear from like what's that guy who was the New York
it was
mayor?
Well,
It was essentially. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say he more did not Americans, really.
Mm.
I was
They
just
also
gonna say,
they also do the whole. Sorry for interrupting, but just quickly.
sorry.
They also do the whole like covering up ethnic statistics around I don't know, rape and such, like rape and things like that. So they won't like to talk about the ethnicities and the races of who's committing all the crimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I can remember there was a case of like this Kyrgyz guest worker who raped a Russian Russian woman in, I can't remember where, but essentially the mayor of that particular town just basically said, okay, no more Kyrgyz guest workers for like at least 10 years after this. So it's kind of like on one hand they'll do that, but then in some areas they'll be pretty cooked, for one of a better term, like in terms of how they approach stuff like race, because East Slavs approach the question of race in a different way to how we Westerners approach it. That's how I would term it.
How so?
So,
you know,
oh, sorry.
Like how do the East Slavs view it differently? Because my understanding is that they view it basically the same as we do, in that there's a distinct genetic Russian people, and they need to be protected and propagated against the the minority masses who are.
Yeah, it's kind of like schizophrenic in some way. So, for example, from the Russians I've met, like, I would say on one hand, you have like two categories, like Ruski and Rossiyanin. Ruski is ethnic Russians, like East Slavs, racially Slavic people. I mean, you've got Rossiyanin, which is pretty much everyone else, so Chechens, Tatars, Buryats, etc. But there's that, but then you get certain areas like Tatarstan and Bashkiria or Chilvashia, where the people are Turkic, but they mix so much with the Slavs that they're pretty much interchangeable with ethnic Russians. So back in the times of like for example, after the Second World War, a lot of Russian men died, but there was still a lot of Russian women, and those Russian women, to find a sexual partner, mixed a lot more with the Turkic peoples. So that's why in the days of the Soviet Union, there was a lot more race mixing, to the point where a lot of Russians actually despise that period, because they see it as like a time where the Russians were marginalized, not just politically through like anti-Russian discrimination laws, but also because Stalin got a lot of good Russian men killed off, and for their reward, a lot of Russian women just race mixed. So that's another layer on top of the whole. On one hand, Russians hate Soviet Union, but also love it in equal measure. I'm going off at a tangent, but you get my point.
Yeah,
that makes perfect sense, actually. I'm looking at Dorsastic Draco's comment in the chat, and he's saying, give an imperial identity to people historically in proximity. So what he's talking about is like the Russian Empire, although it was enormous, because Russia is the biggest country in the world, or we used to be anyway. All of its peoples were next to each other. Like, it wasn't like the British Empire, where there were bits all around the globe, often separated by hundreds and even thousands of miles of sea. So what Dorsastic Draco is saying is giving an imperial identity to peoples historically in proximity is different to importing Africa. But there are Slavic Russians who dislike importing Turkic Muslims into European Russia. And that, to me, makes a lot of sense. And the other thing I would say is, which Dorsastic Draco also mentioned in the chat, like in Ukraine, for example, we have seen Chechens, Muslim Chechens, fighting for Russia. So what do you guys think of that one?
Yeah, with Chechens, it's a lot of them will be doing it for the money, but also I can just imagine. It's like Indian soldiers in the British Army after the 1857 rebellion. Like, they probably just served because they actually genuinely love the country, not just their money. Perhaps.
I don't know. I think it's part of the informal arrangement that maybe it is formalized. I'm just not aware, between Kadyrov and Putin, basically, where Kadyrov has his own militias and such, like private armies in Chechnya, and they are basically at the disposal of Putin to do whatever he needs them to do. And in return, Russia pays for the economic well-being, with plenty of stimulus and gibs for Chechnya to be, well, initially rebuilt, but now it's doing pretty well for itself.
Yeah,
but let's also point out that like Britain has a very large Muslim population, sadly, in my opinion. But the vast majority of British Muslims, far more British Muslims joined the Islamic State, which was a terrorist slaving state, than have ever joined the British Armed Forces.
Well, okay, here's the extra bit of rub then, I guess. There are plenty of Chechens who are in that same kind of boat, but they get kicked out of Chechnya quite quickly because Kadyrov will often hunt them down and push them out if they're not willing to play ball with him and the wider Russian state to a lesser extent. And a lot of those guys have ended up fighting on the side of Ukraine.
So generally speaking, Russia's just got the best part of the deal then, as far as I'm working out. Because if we could only do that to the all the assorted Muslims in UK who went and joined the Islamic State, who, like I say, are a terrorist organization that is also a slaving organization, literally, like they take slaves. Vastly more British Muslims joined the Islamic State than have ever joined the British Armed Forces. So as far as I can work it out, Putin and Russia have got this right relative to Britain.
Yeah, I generally agree on that. Like on the topic of like Chechnya, it's also Kadyrov's father, a guy called Akhmat, he was a guy who worked with the Russians because Chechnya was pretty much split between two camps. There's like a Wahhabist, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but like Wahhabist, which is like very like extreme anti-Western, just pretty much anti everyone who's not Islamic, and also anti everyone who's not follower of it. And then you got the other Chechens who are not as fond of that sort of extreme version of Islam, and they started with Akhmat Kadyrov. So a lot of Chechens will say, okay, well, these Wahhabist Chechens, they're also quite, they were the ones who did terrorist attacks in Russia. They're the ones who were doing the gun dealing and generally turning Grozny into like pretty much a mafia city back in the 90s. So a lot of Chechens will also like Kadyrov and Putin because Chechnya back in the 90s was pretty much just a gun trading marketplace. It wasn't really a real country back in those days. It was just run by like terrorists pretty much. So that's also another layer on topic of Chechnya is generally that, it brought stability.
Well, sorry,
look,
I missed it if you said, but like the current Kadyrov, his father that you did mention was actually killed by a lot of these fundamentalist guys. They assassinated him, and so for a lot of the people who are on board with the current Kadyrov, I can't remember what his first name is, Ramzan.
Yeah.
Ramzan Kadyrov. A lot of the people who are on board with him do also have personal grievances alongside him for what the Islamists were doing. So if that were not a factor, then perhaps perhaps Ramzan Kadyrov would be less willing to work with Putin. But I mean, he's been a pretty stalwart ally so far in a lot of different areas, so maybe not. But it does help. There's that additional personal link between them.
I've certainly seen video from people who are on the Russian and the pro-Russian Republic side in Ukraine of Chechens like saving civilians from that area and moving them under fire away from the Ukrainians. So, whatever.
Yeah, you also see on the Russian side a lot of rhetoric about fighting the Great Shaitan or Great Satan because you also have in Russia they have like a mainstream Islam, but it's a sort of Islam where it's not extreme in any way. It generally teaches, okay, look, we live in a country with Russian Orthodox and Turkic pagans and whatnot. Let's just try and get on. Basically, is the whole point of that Islam. So the Chechens can actually get on with Orthodox Christians, whereas it's a lot different to our Muslims over here. And that's why you'll see Chechen Muslims fighting the Ukrainians, who they see as basically puppets of the Great Satan.
Well, as I understand it, the both the Russian Empire and the later Soviets did a pretty good job of channeling the Islamic practice within their country down acceptable lines, basically. So they had their own sort of allowable schools of Islam and such that were set up, and their own councils that were approved by the Tsar and later the Soviet government. So they do have a lot more sort of institutional practice, I guess, at making sure that the Muslims will be able to play ball with the Russians and everybody else in the country. Whereas I don't think we ever really had that, to my knowledge, in Britain. We would lean more on the side of playing off different groups that had sort of more natural enmities with each other, playing them off against each other.
That's not totally true, Rupert, because the British Army in India, for example, had Muslim regiments, and those Muslim regiments were from particular regions, and were definitely not particularly anti-British, because otherwise they would have murdered their officers. Now, it has to be said that from 1919 onwards, they did occasionally murder their officers, but not all that often.
Yeah, I mean, my point more is that so you can get at people's personal loyalties, and you can have Islam not being a particularly motivating quality in people's like political affiliations and things. But what Russia seems to have done that we didn't is channel that religious energy in away from dangerous directions, whereas we didn't quite get involved in the theology.
So more intelligent than us. Okay, fair enough.
Potentially,
yeah. Well, not potentially, actually.
Well, I mean, there's a
where we are now.
Exactly.
I mean, I had someone on the Discord today saying that there was large parts of a British English town cut off for Afghani independence celebrations. Now, I'm pretty sure if you or I, as an Englishman, went across to Afghanistan or Pakistan and tried to organise a British independence celebration, we wouldn't get very far. I strongly suspect.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to answer like Doxastic Draco when he says about where secularism, and the only problem with that is now it's been reversed by the likes of Erdogan, who so the problem so Putin has this whole sort of, as like Rupert said, Russians are very good at channeling Islam in a sort of more moderate, more tolerant aspect, for want of a better way of explaining it. But then you got Erdogan, he's got his whole geopolitics summed up as like pan-Turkic and Islamist mixed together, which kind of cancerous mix when you consider that Russia's sphere of influence contains a lot of Turkic Muslim states. And within Russia, there's also a lot of Turkic Muslim minorities. So that's why, for example, that's why Russia and Turkey, for example, are arch rivals, because you have Russia's a multi-ethnic, multi-spiritual and whatnot, whereas Turkey is trying to disrupt that by its pan-Turkic Islamist geopolitics.
Yeah, and that does go back quite far as well. So even under the Ottoman Empire, you had people who were pushing pan-Tyrannism, or pan-Tyrannism, I think is what it's called. The pan-Turkic movement, basically getting all Turks together into one state. I think Enver Pasha died in Turkestan, I think.
Yeah, the Basmachi rebellion against the Soviets.
Yeah. The Islamism thing it seems more like a bit of a new thing, really, where previously they were kind of not apathetic by any stretch on the Islam question, but much more willing to kind of ride a middle line between the various not ethnic minorities, but religious minorities, and even sometimes taking on more Christian and Greek characteristics than Islamic and Turkic.
Yeah, it's okay. I know. You take for example, you take for example numerous caliphate and what have you that ruled over like Spain before the Reconquista and whatnot, you'd have one set of rulers who were pretty tolerant, but then the other set of rulers, like the Almoravids, who were pretty anti-Christian, anti-Jewish, etc. So it's kind of like a pick and mix, Like as George said, it's super dynamic in its interpretation. And with the Turks, it's on one hand, you'd have the Turks who'll say, okay, you can be Christian, but you got to pay more tax. Or perhaps they'll just coerce you to convert to Islam. So, for example, you've got the Bosnians and Albanians who converted to Islam because they didn't fancy paying the taxes or going through the Janissary system. Whereas other groups like the Serbs and Bulgarians and Greeks stayed true to the Orthodox Church.
Yes, but it's not as though Christian countries haven't had significant periods of either tolerance or intolerance, according to various schools and various time periods as well. So I don't know if it's quite so easy to say Islam or Christianity are more like dynamic than each other. I mean, especially when you get into the antics of the Jesuits and their.
It would be less, Rupert. Surely, yeah, all right. There were occasions when you got burned for being a heretic by one side or the other, but they were not all that common, and actually the numbers involved were relatively small, mostly.
Well, I mean, when you get into burning for being a heretic, maybe, but I mean, you had plenty of wars whose entire purpose basically was to try and convert from one sect of Christianity to another. So if you can't be casualties from those, or the moral laws that were introduced on a Christian basis. So when you do things like introducing the death penalty for adultery, which hadn't really existed so much prior, that was in the Reformation era as well.
Hang on, the Romans did that.
Yes, but it was relaxed. It was relaxed later in the early Middle Ages, I believe.
Yeah, but I mean, the ancient Romans had that. The ancient Greeks certainly did too.
Yeah, well, they were a lot more hardcore than people like to.
Yes, yeah. I mean, aside from the tuning lifting, of course, but yeah. But I mean, I just think that that sort of thing is kind of like protecting marriage, which we as traditionalists should probably be in favor of. Not that I'm suggesting that you should execute people for that now, although I mean that would be ridiculous. But we might get rid of divorce rate, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not stating a value judgment. I'm just comparing Islam to Christianity and saying there might not necessarily these things can be interpreted in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, for sure. Adam, and you haven't said anything for a bit, mate. You're the co-host of the show. What do you reckon?
Well, I'll say that the Greeks weren't as much into tunic lifting as people often think.
Yeah, no, I agree with that too.
That's kind of like a late Greek thing.
Well, it's a Roman thing, really.
Well, yeah.
But yeah.
But not many other thoughts from my end. No, I'm good.
I was going to say that's another point of historiography, like pretty bad historiography, because I believe some of that was propagated by the Romans to try and prove that the Greeks were like effeminate and girly, whereas the Romans were strong and masculine.
Yes, absolutely right. You're entirely correct about that. All right, I've got a couple of things I wanted to talk about. First one is, what is it with the National Health Service, that vast money sink that Britain must get rid of, pretending that they are having a winter crisis at the end of one of the hottest Augusts on record?
Oh, is this the stories about like the ridiculous long ambulance wait times and stuff like that?
Yeah, and telling people to stay away from A&Es and all this sort of thing, accident and emergency departments. They're telling people to stay away from them. Don't put your NHS under any sort of pressure, because the winter crisis is upon us. And it's not even the end of August, and it's been one of the hottest Augusts in about 30 years. So,
yeah, I think part of it is they're also being, I don't want to use the phrase overwhelmed, but they're being pressed by a lot of the health issues that have popped up from people ignoring them and going without going to see their doctor for
Yeah,
when most
because
are locked down.
China virus shut everything down. Yeah, and that's not even talking about
And
the
a lot of GPs still aren't seeing their patients as well, which doesn't help.
yeah,
There's a lot of telephone consultations still going on.
And let's not even mention the side effects of some of the vaccines. But there we go. Yeah.
Well, there's also the element where, actually, I'm not sure. Has their budget increased that much recently? But I mean, regardless of whether or not it has or hasn't, they are still.
It constantly goes up.
Yeah, well, yes, but is it actually increasing above inflation? Whatever.
They got a big chunk, didn't they? Like about 18 months ago. But they would probably say no, it hasn't kept up with inflation, or at least not relative to what it was going up under previous governments.
Yeah. Meanwhile, they like even more people are also being added to the population all the time.
Yeah.
So the needs for it are increasing, and the population is aging as well, which also doesn't help.
Yep.
So a whole lot more need for it as well, just due to structural reasons, and not enough money being found to prop it up anymore, combined with the fact that it's been horrendously managed for so long and nobody has a good way of actually managing it out of that issue. So it's
George is saying in the chat, directed at you, Ruth, but the budget has had a guarantee of payment increase above inflation since the vile traitor, scumbag, communist Tony Blair era.
Well, come on, you're paraphrasing now. That's not what he said.
No, I was just more accurate at the end.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, even when you talk about during the recession, when we had the so-called austerity, it was the tiniest little divot in NHS funding that they took. But the thing is, they just keep increasing the middle management bureaucracy all the time.
And more Somalian and Afghan cleaners, which is always going to make the NHS better.
Well, also, I mean, even more than that, Somalian and Afghan doctors who
are semi-qualified at best.
Yeah, who are massively over-index in malpractice cases, which the NHS has to pay for.
Oh, listen, I was my woman used to be a registered nurse in Australia, and she used to point out to me how most of the third world nurses that they got into Australia had to be retrained because they actually weren't qualified. So
Yeah.
they weren't qualified by Australian standards. Now they probably don't do that anymore, but I have a strong suspicion that UK hasn't done that for years now. I just think it's probably true, it's insane. Look, the NHS is a complete money sink that the British public can put all their money into, and the NHS will still not work properly.
No. I mean, George said in chat, it's not a problem you can solve by throwing money at it. A lot of centralisation
you have
damaged
to
it quite irrevocably as well.
Yeah, and you've got to basically totally change the system. You've got to totally change the system that we have. You've got to give people who can afford it the chance to have private health insurance and have a safety net underneath that for people who can't, which is what the NHS was originally supposed to be.
Yeah, so not to put like an Ataman story time into the middle of your stream, but
no, go for it, mate. You haven't spoken much.
There was a funny enough, Royal Biscuits, who was in the chat earlier. We used to work at the same place. Although I don't think he was working that night. I was with someone else, but we were working at this warehouse, and there was a truck driver who was actually for the warehouse unit next door. He was from Ireland. He parked up overnight, and he was having a heart attack. And I called for the ambulance, and we're only maybe about a mile from the ambulance station. So I was trying to explain to the lady where we were, and I just said, look, it's literally you just have to follow down this road half a mile from the ambulance station. We're right on this edge of the road. They'll see us. And she's just like, oh, I'm in a call center. over in wherever. I don't know where that is. It's like, well, look for your ambulance station in this town, and you'll be able to find it easily from there. And it was a massive long palaver. Luckily, the guy was fine in the end. They did manage to get to us and take him off to hospital, and it was all right. But I mean, that was years ago, and it's just gotten worse since then. It's always had a lot of issues.
I had a heart attack about, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. And I walked about 3 miles to the hospital and just went into the A&E and said to the nurse on duty, I think I've had a heart attack. And she listened to my symptoms and said, yeah, I think you have. So
well, yeah, funny enough, I mean, usually a lot of people when they're having heart attacks, sometimes they get quite aggressive about not wanting to go to hospital. And it's quite late in the game, you sort of drive them there, and then when they get there, they're sort of.
I've been working all day, and I tried taking heartburn pills and all this kind of stuff, and it wasn't working. And like I vaguely knew in the back of my mind, like if you've got a big pain in your left arm and down your left side, it's probably a heart attack. And so after like I'd been working all day and I went home and I had something to eat and I still felt shit. And so I thought, all right, I'm going to have to walk to the hospital, I guess. So I did. But,
Yeah, I mean, it can hit some people fast and it can hit some people very slow. But yeah, and some people can still be pretty functioning with it. And that can really fuck some people up.
It wasn't that bad with me. I just needed a stint.
Yeah.
So that was weird because you're like lying there, you can watch it on the TV screen as they do this stuff because it's only a local anesthetic. That was weird. That was bloody weird, I have to say. And now I have to take half an aspirin all the time. But
yeah, it's. I mean, they externalized things like dentistry, and dentistry improved significantly. So I do think it's a case that the NHS should look at what they can and can't do, and they should just get rid of the stuff they can't do. So like varicose veins, the NHS has a terrible history for treating varicose veins. They're really bad at it.
So why do they do it? I mean, that's not life-saving.
No, and the thing is, it's actually something you can get quite cheap in the private sector. But of course, the private sector can't compete with the NHS, who literally give out the procedure for free. So it's something like that where they should probably just withdraw from that part of the industry.
So would you agree with me, Armin, that like if you're going to keep some sort of NHS, it should be life-saving shit?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, they have
A&E, I guess, because people get in car accidents and planes crash and things that happen. So A&E. Like accident and emergency, sure, got no problem with that. And they should do life-saving shit. That, like, if you don't get that treatment, you're going to die. And the other stuff should be private, really.
Yeah, it's healthcare system, right? I do, but. Yeah, it's a magnet for just subversive forces, and it just gets used as a weapon in the political arena all the time, and it completely ruins its purpose. God's Own Prototype in chat said, "I waited several hours with an infant with a bloody head injury in London several years ago. I told the mother as soon as I arrived to jump in the car, but she insisted the ambulance was coming. It took several hours for her to relent. And I don't think she'll wait ever again." Well, yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I just when my grandmother had her anaphylactic shock, I just
take her.
Yeah, I just put her in the car and took her. I wasn't. Yeah. And there was no arguing. Because they're so slow and useless for that sort of thing. And even then, I actually went to the hospital that was closer, but didn't have an A&E unit. Because it's got a better reputation, and she did get better care in there than she did when they took her to the A&E unit at the other hospital. So,
well, I mean, look, if you take someone to any hospital, they're not going to say "fuck off." You know what I mean? They're going to treat you. I hope, anyway. I mean, if it's something serious, they're going to treat you at least. So I don't know. But to me, like the NHS is just it's a total money sink for British taxpayers these days, and they need to stop. I mean, like, you know, half of the people using it are Afghans and Armenians and God knows who else who's just arrived in the country and have never paid 1 cent into national insurance or anything else. So,
Well, yeah. So like, I live in a very white area of the southeast. It's getting a little more diverse, but it's very minor. And yet I go down to my doctor's surgery, and we're all standing outside in the car park, and it looks like a Moroccan bazaar more than you know, it's not representative of the demographics of the area at all.
but they're all getting free treatment, you see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of them, they'll claim everything. They'll even get like painkillers and stuff on prescription, which they'll claim for free.
Anything to add to that, Rupert or Mitch?
No, not in particular. Just yeah, I mean, the whole thing is pretty abysmal. It was built for a country that doesn't really exist anymore, and it was sort of dubiously a good idea at the time. The fact that a giant cult has built up around it is kind of stopping us from being able to solve any other problems, and it's a general leech on the national budget.
Don't disagree with that at all, Rupert. I think that's a pretty fair way of describing it. Mitch, any opinions on that?
Not anything of my own thoughts, just echoing.
What do the Russians do about healthcare?
Most people go private because the national service isn't really that good for quality.
So they do have one, but
it's not good in quality, so they'll always go private. Like if you
that seems to be the way people are going here, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing I was going to say is the only thing that's sustaining our system probably is the fact that so many people pay for it but don't actually use it because they use private instead.
I agree with God's own prototype that the NHS is a giant parasite.
Well, is he saying the NHS or the Albanians?
Well, both. I would agree with both, but especially the NHS. National Health Service is a giant parasite on the British public, for sure.
Yeah.
If you said if you were talking about the other one, I'd agree with you even more.
We have to be careful, gentlemen. YouTube is not a free speech platform, you know that.
Well, so I can't talk about the mountain Turks.
George in the chat is saying just about all professional jobs these days offer health insurance, which indeed they do.
Yeah, I mean, even then, you know, like people who work for private hospitals still have to give a certain amount of time to work in NHS hospitals.
Yeah, it's a communist system, basically, Alan. It really is. I mean, it was designed by the 1945 Labour government, who were communists for the most part. Some of them absolutely, really communists, like working for Stalin. So, you know, I don't disagree with that at all. All right, I had another one to ask you dudes about. Do you guys know Based Welshman, the YouTube channel?
No.
Can't say I do.
I know of him. I haven't watched much of his stuff, though.
All right, yeah, I don't watch all of his stuff, but I watch some. He's got a really nice little dog who he takes everywhere with him, which is one reason why I watch him, because the dog's nice. But also, he's a right of centre dude, and he's been recently doing stuff about the protests about drag time story hour in various libraries and things in Wales. And I'm just still trying to, and he and the other people who are supporting him, and there are a lot of good average Welsh parents who are absolutely against drag time story hour, surprisingly enough. they're all being called anti this, that, and the other, just because they don't want their little kids exposed to demon-looking drag queens. I don't know. What do you guys think of that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually been kind of good. It's been quite the white pill to see people actually coming out against this stuff, and organising quite on quite small scale and locally, and being able to put some real pressure on these events. I mean, this is kind of exactly what the rights needed for a while. Just a little bit bigger and with a little bit more teeth to it. So yeah, I'm kind of. I mean, it's also kind of sad though when you see, especially when these things was first kicking off, like literally like police lines there from dawn. Like they knew what they were going to be up against, and they still went ahead and did it. And obviously it's transparent, but it does still piss me off that when you think that if you've got a right wing guy, even a fairly mundane milquetoast one, going to speak at some campus somewhere, the tiniest little comment, and they will say, oh, it's too much for security threat, it must be called off. But they'll literally come close to pulling out the army to get some drag queen speaking to kids.
Yeah. I mean, Adam, and I don't know if you're old enough, but like, could you have imagined that in the 1980s?
No, you couldn't even imagine it more than sort of 8 years ago.
Yeah. Yep. Fair enough.
And I put a video in the video section on Discord a day or two ago, maybe, by, I can't remember his name. He's one of the Scottish YouTubers. But he covered a bit in that video of a radio interview about one of these particular drag troons, and in this sort of radio conversation, they were basically saying, well, parents were kicking off about what was on the performers' social media pages, which was horrific, explicit content, and they were saying, well, those kids shouldn't be on social media anyway, because it's for 13s and above. And it's like, okay, this is some weird sort of moral posturing they're doing here to defend literally rolling drag queens out in front of kids. Yeah, Doc Acid Draco's got it. No chance. That's the guy.
There's the link in the chat, Adam.
Oh, cheers.
Yeah, I'm just amazed at this stuff. Like I said, 1980s, like every single right-thinking human would have gone insane about this shit. And yet now, somehow, only some people do? It's just, I don't know, man.
Most people aren't even aware of it, that's the thing.
Yeah, well, that's true. I don't know. Rupert and Mitch, what do you guys think of that one?
Yeah, not much to say. I mean, the whole drag queen story hour thing is pretty perverse in itself. But the fact that there's like an entire structured industry behind it, basically to prop up people who otherwise would be basically left out because they have no real purpose or opportunity for advancement. It does just seem
and scores of cops defending them.
Yeah, well, but I mean, in the sense that you have people who are lobbying to basically like to allocate funding for these projects just so that these people can have a job and just get like free money at the expense of people who are obviously against it. Yeah, I don't know. It seems like pure political friend enemy in a lot of ways, just a redistribution of resources to people who are political allies.
Yeah.
100. Mitch, you got anything to add on that one?
Can't say I do. I mean, all I would say is if this doesn't wake up people, then don't know what will.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, and in America, it certainly is. I mean, like the race theory stuff and the drag queen story hour stuff and the LGBTQ stuff is waking up people in America. I'm not sure it is so much in Britain, or at least not as fast. I don't know what you do, think.
I mean,
It's more-
if it, I'm sorry.
It's more about organization is the thing.
Yeah.
So, like, are we going to be able to? So, in that sense, it doesn't even necessarily matter how many people it wakes up, as it were. It's more just to do with what actually happens as a result of that, and whether there is going to be some kind of counter push against it. Because ultimately, what would need to happen is basically the reverse.
Yeah, it's like
Well,
in
I
America. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, yeah. I mean, there's you're not really going to wake people up. It's us. We're on our own, and anything that positive that can happen has to come from people doing the organising.
But we do have to wake more people up, haven't we?
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of think we've got the numbers. We just need to do more with it.
Well, the main way in which
yeah.
the main way in which that would make any kind of difference typically is just through protests, which they can just ignore. So, there's not really all that much point in that. The media just won't pay attention, and the politicians won't pay attention. And if they do pay attention, it'll just be to scorn them and call them a bunch of racist Nazis.
Yeah.
Or alternatively through the ballot box, and the ballot box in the UK is particularly fruitless because they'll even if they make promises, which they often don't, but even if they do, then they'll just ignore them. I remember seeing something quite recently that was talking about how a reduction in immigration was on the manifesto of every winning party for the last 80 years, but it's never happened.
I will say that I think they're a little more vulnerable to protests than people on the right often think, but for different reasons to what's usually stated, which is that they very much run their regime as if it were a decentralized establishment, as the very system, as the sort of very strategy for running it, and you end up with huge amounts of, let's say, like the journalistic class for one, who genuinely do start to believe that they are sort of dissidents out of power and see protests as a very, very existential threat, and they overreact, and that causes them to have mask slips and various other really bad miscommunications, which can do them a lot of damage. But you've then got to obviously like tally that up with is it worth, let's say, an entire section of the right getting thrown to the wolves through the establishment going after them just to score the odd little embarrassment or PR blunder for them.
Yeah, I mean, need I reference January 6th?
Well, yeah.
Well, some of those poor buggers are still in prison.
Yeah, exactly. And plenty of them have been depersoned, and it's been an excellent opportunity to just go after all the networks, break up all the networks, go after the leaders, arrest the leaders. So, I don't know. Best case scenario, everything goes basically according to how you said, Ataman, and then you get a mask slip moment where more people are woken up. But then what do you do with that? Do you have another protest that's slightly bigger and then make the mask slip even more? I don't really see how that leads to anything.
What was the mask slip? What was the mask slip moment that the intellectual chap did the other day? That was on
Sam Harris.
Yeah, Sam Harris. What did he say, Alan?
Hunter
Biden. I've got the quote.
Oh yeah, you go the proper quote. I could only paraphrase.
He said Hunter Biden could have literally had the corpses of children. Oh, hang on. Hunter Biden could have literally had the corpses of children in his basement. I would not have cared.
Which is funny because somebody
and that's not a sick society. That's not a sick society. Honestly, it's not.
It's funny because he was somebody went back and found another clip from another interview that he did, and he made almost the exact same point where he was saying that we don't need religion, and in fact the idea of hell is particularly dangerous because I, even as just as a rational person, speaking of course, if I knew that there were that my neighbor was holding children and torturing children in his basement, then I would have to go and beat down the door and save them because that's the moral thing to do. So I mean, he's kind of proved himself wrong there. Maybe we do need a
bit of a
higher,
hypocrite. A bit of
higher
a
authority after all.
hypocrite. He could be a bit of a hypocrite.
Yeah, I mean that was. I mean, he tried to walk that back, I think, on Twitter.
I
saying
think
that
he
wasn't
did.
exactly
Yes.
what he meant, but
Yeah. But it
even then, he
obviously
kind of
was.
actually just sounded just as bad as he did the first time.
Yeah. No. Look, the guy's obviously a CUNT. I'm sorry.
And
He's
his main thing in that interview was he goes, "Oh, Trump University alone kind of." That's not the exact quote, but he said he brings up Trump University and basically says like that alone is enough evidence to justify doing whatever was necessary to keep him out. And it's like, okay, yeah,
Well,
Trump University.
including dead children in a basement. I mean, God's sake, man!
Yeah,
Give me a break. That's insane.
yeah.
That's just insane.
Well, he got TDS pretty bad. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh man, I don't know about some of these people.
A Georgian chat said, "I take difference with Ataman here. All rallies will be spun and can be used however they wish. Charlottesville, January 6th, Freedom Train." Yeah, I'm not. I should have probably prefaced that by saying I'm not saying it's a strategy to win. I'm just saying that I think in some ways our regime has a little bit more of a vulnerability there than previous regimes, but we haven't got a means to exploit that, at least not yet.
Well, this is going to be my final thing I'm going to talk about this evening. I reckon the coming winter in the Northern Hemisphere is going to be extremely revealing. Increasing numbers of British people in polls think there are going to be riots. And I think Britain might be relatively well off compared to, say, Germany. I think we're going to have loads of old age pensioners who are going to die this winter because they can't afford to heat their homes and also eat. And maybe it's something for us that we can exploit. Because I've got to the stage where we need to have a big breakdown, in my opinion, to change anything for the better. What do you do to think about that?
I'm worried that this crisis will probably actually just strengthen their position.
Yeah, that's always a risk that they would just.
It is.
Well, essentially that they'll just take out all of the debt that's necessary to cushion the blow because they can afford to push off all of the pain onto the third world, basically, that can't match the bids for food and energy and such, and that's just accepted as a hit that we're going to have to take for the long term political integrity of all the different Western countries, and just obviously abandon certain key elements of the green agenda temporarily for the sake of just being able to heat homes and things. I think that's.
Well, let's hope that at least happens. But yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, things might get even more wacky than that, actually, because I was recently.
Yeah, I think they might get a lot more wacky. I think we're heading into not a recession, but a depression. And Britain's going to obviously have over 20% inflation next year. No doubt about that whatsoever.
All right, let me suggest it'll be even more wacky than that, because something I saw quite recently that was very surprising was that I can't remember if it was that France was either openly talking about or had actively done it already, sending troops into Yemen to secure Yemen to secure gas. Like storage facilities or gas production facilities.
Yemen is a fairly not very good government that probably doesn't have much of an armed forces, and the French probably can do that. Yeah. Fair enough.
How bad would it have to be before we did the same for Nigeria?
I don't think the British Army's big enough to do that to Nigeria anymore, mate. I really don't. I'm sorry. The French could certainly do that in Yemen. Yemen is a Arab desert republic with not all that many people. I don't think Britain could do that in Nigeria. I don't think we have enough troops. Sorry.
Well,
I'm not saying I'd be against doing it. I just don't think we have enough soldiers.
Yeah, George, you are correct that it could be solved tomorrow if we simply said to Putin that we don't care about Ukraine and then remove regulations and sanctions. But are they actually going to do that? I don't know that they. I mean, it's the wild thing is that it does seem like on the current trajectory, it is more likely that we get into imperialism again than we make friends with Russia. That's just where we are right now, it seems.
Fair enough. I still
Yeah,
don't
Lee Ham
think-
said French troops or the Foreign Legion. It was the French Foreign Legion they were sending in.
Yeah. But there is no country, like certainly not Nigeria, which is an enormous. I beg your pardon, guys. Pardon me.
Don't smoke, kids.
I mean, yeah. The other point is though that we wouldn't need
I'm
to.
sorry, boys. I was sneezing. Not.
Oh, okay.
Had nothing to do with anything. But yeah, Britain couldn't. Britain couldn't do that with Nigeria. Nigeria has far too many people, and the British Army is infinitesimal these days.
Well, it's the same. It's the same principle, really, as in Yemen at the moment, where you only really need to secure a handful of places because you just need to secure the oil infrastructure. And if you do it as well in cooperation with some like local tribal community, then you have a solid backing to be able to rely on additional manpower on the ground to help you stabilize the situation. So I don't think it's a case of sending in the British Army and invading all of Nigeria and then like putting a puppet government in charge. I don't think that would be necessary at all.
It didn't work too well when Britain was trying to save. For God's sake, I'm sneezing, guys. It has nothing to do with smoking. It had nothing to. That didn't work too well for Britain when she was trying to save Sierra Leone from the revolution in Liberia next door, where the rebels were chopping off the arms and legs of the people who they came into contact with. Took Britain nearly 2 years to stop that. And Britain's army and armed forces generally were much more powerful in 2000 than they are today. I'm just saying. And I'm pro-British forces, you know. It's that.
Yeah, it's. I mean, George in chat asked about would the UK public endorse Russian sanctions now?
Probably
look,
not.
I still think yes, because there are, like, just from anecdotal experience, there are still plenty of people who basically think that Putin is like evil incarnate and
Yeah.
you know, the next big H.
I speak to a lot of normies, right? I speak to a lot of normies. I can't understate this. I speak to a lot of fucking normies, right? And there's a little bit of slippage. You know, there's a little bit of, you know, I can now openly say to people when they say, "Oh, did you see, you know, that we were sending whatever's over there?" And I'll go, "Yeah, that's another thing we're not getting back that, you know, we've got to pay for." And if I'd said that sort of at the beginning of the crisis, I would have gotten death stares and even some pretty aggressive reactions. Now I say it and I get kind of people have a bit of a side laugh and they go, "Yeah, you know." But yeah, people are still broadly sort of, "Oh yeah, but you know, it's bad what's happened and we need to support the Ukrainians." So I think it will take a while before that narrative's completely smashed.
But it is dying.
Very slowly, but yeah.
Yeah,
and it also does coincide with the fact that the media has started to soften on the hardline pro-Ukraine side. They've started being a little bit more critical of like the current Ukrainian government.
Yeah,
they have. They've slowly started to realize, hang on, Ukraine hasn't won a single battle yet, so probably they're losing. But yeah, could be that.
The amount of terrible conversations I had with people where people would say to me like, "Oh, that's Zelensky. He's an impressive leader, isn't he?" And you're just gonna have to bite your tongue. I don't get that anymore. So
yeah, you're right. And like they are running out of weapons. Like the European Union has basically said we don't have any more weapons to give to Ukraine. Even the American stories, like given that the Americans are basically paying for all of the Ukrainian civil service and government and pensions because they can't do it themselves anymore. Even the American stuff is like turning off.
I mean, that's probably why they're trying to shell the nuclear power station now.
Well, it could be. I mean, maybe, nuclear power disaster in the middle of Europe is better than not getting any more money from the West or weapons, but
Well, there was also the one.
Hang on, I must just address Stephen J.J. Drains in the chat. The Ukrainians should just lay down and hope not to die, I guess. Do you know what? On that basis, Stephen J.J. James, which I totally agree with, by the way, you are banned. You're gone, all right? See you, mate.
Can't do that to poor Stephen. He's a good chap.
I don't agree with that. He wears short shorts and films from bad angles. So I'm not going to agree with that at all. So you're gone, Stephen J.J. James. And yeah, fuck Ukraine. Really, I don't care about it. I don't care who runs Ukraine. I don't care who runs Ukraine. Not at all. Honestly.
I'm not going to go as far as to say fuck Ukraine, but
yeah, I just don't care who runs Ukraine. I don't. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to any British person. It doesn't matter to any American who runs Ukraine. And if we only realised that, we would save ourselves so much money and grief.
Well, I mean, from a humanitarian perspective, it's pretty horrifying to have to see so many people just being thrown into a meat grinder, basically for no reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Why didn't the Ukrainians just surrender in the first place so no one had to die? That's all they needed to do.
The death of a lot of good patriots as well is always tragic. I mean, that's the thing about a lot of these kinds of wars is that the people who are quickest to sign up and be most brave in the defense of their country are the ones who are most sorely needed afterwards.
I totally agree with that too. I do. I totally agree with that. It's just stop being morons, Like, you're not going to beat Russia. I'm sorry, you're not. So what's the point in you trying to fight? And the fact that you've been fighting a war against those two breakaway republics that wanted to be Russian since 2011 at least, and you've been, shelling their cities and all the rest of it, why did you do that? You didn't have to.
I feel like
I'm generally not in favour of nations like shelling nursery schools and nursing homes and this kind of stuff. And the Ukrainians have been doing that consistently because these people didn't want to be part of Ukraine. I don't get it. It's weird to me.
Yeah, on one hand, I can understand why Ukraine's fighting because they've not exactly got amicable history with Moscow. I mean, okay, so Ukrainians call it the Holodomor, but I mean, I've got my issues with the whole narrative. But yeah. But I mean, so for example, the Holodomor, I mean, it's mainly Russian-speaking peasants that were starved to death. It wasn't the Western Ukrainians because most Western Ukrainians were under Polish rule at that time.
Yeah.
But then you got, but then on the other hand, you got to think there's got to be some sort of Ukrainian identity because clearly there's just hundreds of thousands of men putting their lives on the line. There's clearly something intrinsic they feel they're sacrificing for. That has to be something there, in my opinion.
They weren't real nice, though, were they? To like not only the Russians, but even the Poles in Ukraine. Like Bandera's lot used to surround whole villages with axes and machetes and stuff, and chop up women and old people and children and even babies.
Yeah, that's one thing about Ukrainians is their nationalism. Because you got to think there've been so much between the Russian Empire and the Polish Empire back in back when Poland was an empire anyway. So they feel that for them to market their territories theirs, they have to be really more brutal than the likes of the Cossacks under the Tsar or the likes of the Polish wings hussars could ever be. It's just a basic example of people living under the shadow of one or two imperial powers being more brutal than one can imagine.
I don't know. Look, Stefan Bandera to me was worse than the worst of the Soviet NKVD or the German Nazi SS in World War II. Stefan Bandera was worse than either of those people, and that is really, really saying something.
Yeah, I mean, say what you were with the NKVD. I mean, the SS, for example, they were shocked at the stuff Bandera's lot were doing. Then you got the NKVD. Say what you were with the NKVD, but I don't think they just like chop up a kid. They deport your entire family to Siberia.
I hope they wouldn't,
Yeah.
but I'm not saying they wouldn't. But yeah,
I mean, Russians would just deport your family to Siberia and just have them freeze to death.
I don't know. There's some really grisly stuff in the NKVD were doing, especially the people who were in charge.
Oh, look, the NKVD and the German Nazi SS, to me, were like the most horrifying of horrifying groups. But Stefan Bandera was, if anything, even worse. And that's the Ukrainian so-called hero, who we're supposed to nowadays like as Western liberals, which is just so fucking ridiculous. It's unbelievable, guys. I'm sorry, it just is.
Yeah, that was another empire because I mentioned the Ottoman Empire because also another thing that Ukraine was that's my train of thought. But yeah, another thing about Ukraine was generally you have most Ukrainians like in the east and south. They've always been like very loyal to Russia, like Novorossiya. For example, a lot of the Soviet soldiers that died at Stalingrad were Ukrainian ethnicity, or from the territory of Ukraine, but Russian-speaking ones, not like Western Ukrainians.
All right, I hang on. I'd just say to George in the chat, I know about Durlwanger, and he was an absolute scum. But honestly, Stefan Bandera, I think, was probably a bit worse, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, what the Croatos Ustashi were doing was pretty bad as well. Bad enough to repulse the German advisors that were there. Like,
yeah,
enough to get
like someone said, some of the SS guys were horrified by what these dudes were doing. For God's sake.
But the Durlwanger Brigade were about as bad as it gets in Germany. But yeah, there's a lot of grisly stuff that happens in that period. And
yeah,
I'm presuming Bengal is like taking the piss here. Sorry, Ukraine. Pure in his crime because the Russian army are in full retreat. Okay, I presume that's a joke, Bengal. All right. Jesus, I don't know. Honestly.
Yeah, it's like that Russian film Come and See. I mean, that depicts the German war crimes. That film was watered down, and that film was already brutal enough. Let alone it having to be watered down to depict like the German war crimes.
Well, what was that Polish film you put in our Discord?
Volume.
Yeah,
Volume.
To me, that was worse. That was even worse to me. And that was about Bandera's lot, wasn't it?
Okay, but I mean, with the logs of the Durlwanger Brigade, I mean, they were putting people into churches and burning them to the ground. So I don't really see much of a moral equivalence. It's just Stepan Bandera's lot and the SS in Belarusia are equally as bad in my book.
Yeah, look, if you're killing women and children, you're a bad bastard as far as I'm concerned. But I'm quite old-fashioned like that. But yeah, all right. JB is in the chat. JB, our total Ukrainian shill, is always in. Hardly moving forward either, laughing out loud. You're all right, man. This is not going to go well for you in a few months. I promise. But
I mean, he's not fully wrong when he says like it's pretty much stalemate-ish on the front. So it's not exactly
it's not really, you see, Mitch. I can see what's happening. Russia doesn't want huge casualties, so
They
they're
want-
winning.
they
They're
don't want
winning
huge-
with artillery. They're winning with artillery, not with infantry.
Okay, they're not really taking huge amounts of land, though, are they? Because I mean, for example, they could cut off the
But they're-
Donbass
but-
by taking
but-
Pavlograd and cutting the Donbass off from the rest of Ukraine, and then
Sure.
marching on to take even more land. They could just cut off the Donbass and then just march on to take more land. Wait for the troops in the Donbass to just starve, mutiny, or surrender, and then that's the Donbass sorted, and then just move on to the Dnieper River, cross it. I mean, that's easier said than done, crossing the Dnieper River, with the exception of
If
the
they,
Heston
if they
area.
even want to,
That's true.
And that would be to lean into Ukraine's advantage.
like I don't see the Russians crossing the Dnieper River.
I mean, we already have near
I,
Heston.
yeah, okay, but I don't see them holding that area for a long time. What I see the Russians doing is like making the Ukrainians basically east of the Dnieper River go away, and then maybe even probably taking Odessa. I don't see them doing much more than that, to be honest.
I mean, the thing is, if I were the Russians, I would just annex all of it, because you can't leave a rump Ukrainian state that's
Yeah, you
permanently
can.
revanchist. Well, you can't really, because if that state is still revanchist, they're still going to be, it can be as demographically damaged and economically damaged as damage can get, but it's still going to be a state where their main mission is to retake the land.
Never going to happen. They can't even retake what they've lost now, let alone when they're a rump state that is landlocked. Never going to happen, mate. I don't understand this thinking at all. There's going to be Ukraine will be a third of the size it started out, basically.
With
a smaller fraction of the economy.
But perhaps this is just...
And it will have lost most of its industrial areas, which are in the east.
Okay, but I think you know that because the West views Russia as its arch rival, they'll just prop up what's left of Ukraine. Like, you could see, I don't know, for sake of argument, you could see them like retraining Ukrainians and just trying to gay up what Russians have controlled of Russia has of Northern Russia. You can just see them trying to gay up as much as they can from the rump state in Ukraine, which is why
good luck getting across the Dnieper River. That's a bloody big river, mate.
I mean, Russians had enough trouble trying to cross the Seversky Donetsk River. So
yeah, exactly. So if you make your border the Dnieper, which to me would be the obvious thing for the Russians to do.
What, Odessa's west of Dnieper?
Yeah, no, I know it is, but then you take Odessa and the remaining bit of Black Sea coast of Ukraine, which would make absolute sense to me. I don't see what the Ukrainians are going to do. They can't win now. They couldn't win 6 months ago. All they can do is fight hard and then lose. And sorry, fighting hard and then losing isn't going to win you the war. They have no ability at all to seriously counterattack. They don't have any ability to do it.
Okay, one thing. I mean, like, I'm learning Russian, but I mean, Ukrainian, I can sort of semi-get it. So when I look at Ukrainian social media, they have this whole narrative around, oh, well, we're in a mortal struggle. This is our kind of war of independence. And if we lose this war,
then you've
lost.
Whatever. Okay, then you've lost.
That's why they won't surrender, though, because they see it as a mortal struggle for their country. They
Kill
don't
almost every war is portrayed like that. Though they'll
so
lose.
Then I'd say kill them all. I'm not particularly anti-Ukrainian, but if I was a Russian, I'd say kill them all. If that's what they think, kill them all.
Okay, I'd say this. I mean, they're two brotherly nations, so the fact that they're shedding each other's blood is very tragic.
They're not brotherly.
Right. If you go to Kharkov and speak Russian, mate, people will speak Russian to you back. It's like, for example, it's like
And many of them are intermarried, I know.
yeah. So that's why, for example, Russians aren't. On one hand, I'm looking at the Russian army and I just think certainly there's huge structural issues with it, vis-a-vis a lot of corruption in the because you have the 200,000 men, or like let's say you have like a small professional force that, for example, they sent into Georgia back in 2008. Even with Georgia in 2008, they had issues with units not having enough ammunition because a lot of commanders would sell it off to the black market, or troops not getting paid on time. In the case of this Russian invasion, you've had situations where the Russians don't have enough infantry to accompany their tanks and artillery.
Yep.
You've got commanders who, from what I say, they're just unimaginative. Because I mean, if it was up to me, I would do a pincer move, one from the south and one from the north, by Izium, to cut off the Donbass via a town called Pathology, which connects the Donbass to the rest of Ukraine. Cut off the Donbass.
Are you saying if that was you as a Ukrainian?
No, I'm saying if I was a Russian, like overall strategic general, like if I was Sergei Shoigu commanding this war, I would that's what I would do. I would cut off the Donbass. I wouldn't bang my head against the most fortified area in the world.
But they haven't done that. Mitch.
Look at Avdiivka.
No. Look, they haven't done that. What they've done is they've gone around all of these Ukrainian fortified areas. And
so why are they attacking Pesky and Avdiivka then?
No, hang on.
Pesky, look, this is, for example, they attacked Pesky, which was one of the most fortified areas in the world. They attacked it head on with artillery. They took the place, but
that's fine.
Yeah, sure, but it's still heavily fortified. Now, my point is, why are they fighting directly for the Donbass, going through fortifications that have been built over the past 8 years, whereas opposed they could just surround the Donbass, going through terrain which hasn't been fortified. So, for example, they could take the city of Zaporozhye, or they could attack towards Kryvyi Rog, stretch the Ukrainian army further, and generally just make it easy for their troops to storm into the Donbass at the very least. Or, better yet, circle around the Donbass, cut off said Donbass from the rest of Ukraine, from getting any supplies or Western aid or whatever, and then just marching on to Zaporozhye and Dnipro.
Again, it leans into the Ukrainian advantage. The Ukrainian advantage is like numbers and manpower in this kind of situation. So you talk about stretching Ukraine thin, but it stretches Russia even more thin because they have fewer like manpower resources to work with. So they want their frontage to be as small as possible because that allows them to leverage their equipment advantages much better. So fighting on a narrow front and pushing forward slowly with overwhelming artillery leans into their advantage.
And always going around the flanks, which is what the Russians do always. They never frontally attack places. They just don't. They go around the sides. They increasingly cut them off. And then eventually the Ukrainians have to surrender or retreat in disorder, leaving all their heavy weapons behind. This is what the Russians have done since the start of the war, and it's always been successful.
Also, the other problem is that Russia is probably very much well aware. I mean, as we have, it's basically an open secret now that the Americans and NATO in general are giving Ukraine access to all of their surveillance equipment and whatever, and all of their
but less and less of their weapons because we basically run out now.
Yeah, but it does mean that the Russians' ability to do anything by surprise is vastly hampered, practically impossible, and it means that whatever they do is going to be mirrored by Ukrainian buildups. So that's also something to bear in mind.
But also, so far as I've seen, like Russian losses are about a third of Ukrainian losses. It's very, very hard to work out what they really
I'm
are.
gonna have to shoot off. I've got to get to bed early. I've still got some bits to do as well. So.
Yeah, no worries. And thank you very much for coming on the stream, mate. Any final things to say before you leave?
No, I'm good. We should have talked about that the RAF thing, but
oh yeah, I will bring that up. I was intending to.
All right. Well, anyway, I'll shoot off. I'll talk to you all later.
Go on, man.
Bye.
Okay.
All right, guys, let's finish this Russian bit because I'm going to finish at the top of the hour. Look, the Russians are consistently winning. The Ukrainians are consistently losing, and I can see no military way that the Ukrainians can turn this around. And like, I haven't seen a reasonable military person who has explained to me how they can, because they can't, basically. Like, they're losing, and they keep losing. They might lose more or less slowly, but they're still losing. It's never going to change. It's just going to get worse and worse as far as the Ukrainians are concerned. And good, because the sooner this war stops, the sooner women and kids will stop being killed.
Like what? I mean, on the topic of casualties, I mean, it's between 10 to 15,000, and I'm going off Russians with attitude on that. As for Ukrainian losses, I would say Russians float the number of 150k casualties, like dead and seriously wounded.
Sounds reasonable to me.
I don't know about that. I mean, I've seen other Russian sources say 80k at least. I mean, I'd say 80k at least, personally.
Yep, totally agree.
Like, certainly the kill to death ratio is massively in favor of Russia's, I would say. Just in lieu of like, massive artillery and...
Many Ukrainian soldiers who've been on the front turn around and say, oh, our position was totally destroyed and we never saw a Russian.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, you get situations where foreign troops who served in Afghanistan are saying this war is unlike anything we've ever fought before, because we don't even see a Russian soldier. We just get artillery shells. Most of our guys die before we even see a Russian Z vehicle wheel past us.
Yep. Totally agree. All right, guys. Unless you've got anything to add to that, Rupert, have you?
No, not in particular. I wouldn't want to tie myself to any particular number, or probably even really ballpark as to casualties.
Yeah, no. Look, I've got ballpark. The Ukrainians are losing a lot more blokes than the Russians are, but that's as far as I would go. Apart from that, I would just say this. Apparently, the Royal Air Force, Battle of Britain and all this kind of shit, is no longer allowed to recruit straight white men because they have diversity targets. And the woman who is in charge of RAF recruitment is extremely proud of this. So that was going to be our last thing. Like, I'm honestly, guys, to me, it's just another bit of the anti-white agenda, which is everywhere these days. But it is very, very strong in the British Armed Forces. You can watch any British Forces TV video these days, and I absolutely guarantee you, if it's not about bringing more and more Afghans into Britain, it's about LGBTQ people, gay people, or women. That's the only thing they make videos about anymore, British Forces TV, paid for by the Ministry of Defence, i.e. paid for by British taxpayers. That's the only thing they make videos about anymore. Nothing about thousands of real British veterans who are sleeping rough on the streets every night. Nah. But let's bring more and more Afghans into the country. And there's no agenda here, of course. It's just because, that's the right thing to do. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? The Royal Air Force not being allowed to recruit straight white men because, all those young Battle of Britain pilots, they weren't straight white young men, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I mean, straightforward. I don't know if it's even straightforward friend enemy, but it's just like straightforward anti-white stuff, really. Not really that much to say about it. Just the institution's captured by enemies, basically, ideological enemies. It's a shame because, obviously they've got a good legacy that you'd want to hold up. But if they're going to act as the enemy, then you kind of have to treat them like that.
Yeah, totally agree, man. Totally 100% agree. Very, very good take. Mitch, anything to say on that one?
I mean, put it this way, at least we won't get drafted for any World War III with Russia.
No, I reckon you've got a good chance of getting drafted, mate. I won't, I'm too old. But you've got a good chance of being drafted. I would go and hide, though. I wouldn't actually report, I've got to say. Like, I joined the British Army at 18, and I was Army Barmy as a young boy and an early teenager. But I wouldn't do it today. I just wouldn't. Because what are you defending? I mean, the Britain today, is it worth defending? I'm not at all sure it is, to be honest. I'm really not at all sure it is. And my son's serving in the Royal Navy, and I am increasingly finding it hard not to tell him to leave, to be honest. And he has a dream of running a fleet air arm squadron and eventually a warship, but I'm really finding it hard not to tell him to leave now, because I don't know what you're defending now. Really, I'm not. Like, the Britain I love isn't the Britain that Liz Truss loves, or Boris Johnson loves, or any of the people who love Britain today. It just isn't. I'm sorry. But that's just me, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Anything you want to show, gents, or any final thoughts?
Well, I'm speaking at the Witan soon, so.
Oh yeah. There's a video of you being interviewed, which is excellent, Rupert. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, speaking on Arthurian restoration. So, if you don't have a ticket to that and you want to come along and hear me speak in person, get to hear about hear my speech about revolutions for, well, not the official speech, but an informal speech over a drink about revolutions for about 2 hours, then grab yourself a ticket at Shieldings, I believe, or they do have a they're on Twitter.
Rupert, stick it in the Discord, and when I wake up, like, I haven't been asleep tonight because I was on a stream before this one. But when I wake up, I'll stick it in the description of this stream. If you put the link in the Discord. Mitch, anything?
Sorry?
Anything you would like to shill, or any final thoughts?
Not got anything to show now.
All right, no worries. So I suppose we are done. As always, I will end us with a stream. With a tune. And here we go. Sorry, dudes, I'm tired. I haven't been asleep tonight.
Yeah, so what I mean, you get this talk about us getting drafted for World War III. I have a feeling probably what my fate will be is I'll be told to translate Russian radios or something, but then the Russians just hire Chechens and Yakuts speaking my own languages to screw me over, and I get shot by some fucking 4'9" brain queer woman as my sergeant.
Very likely true, mate. Very likely true. Anyway, I'm going to play us out with you. Okay, gents, that was Aliwal, which was a famous battle in the Anglo-Sikh Wars, fought by General Sir Harry Smith, who was one of Wellington's officers into the war. And it's often called the Battle Without a Mistake. Sir Harry Smith of about 12,000 Anglo-Indian troops, including the 16th Lancers, who were the only British light cavalry regiment to wear red jackets rather than blue, totally defeated a Sikh army of about 25,000 men and destroyed it. Good bloke, Sir Harry Smith. And I would recommend his biography, which is called Remember You Are an Englishman, which is what his dad shouted to him as he was going off to join his first regiment. Thank you very much to Adaman and Mitch and Rupert August for joining me on this stream. And we will see you next week for Splendid Isolation number 86, I think. Good evening, gents. Any want to say goodbye to the folks in the chat?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and good night, all.
Cheers for having me on, Duke. I'll probably be on if I don't pop an aneurysm studying the Russian case system between now and then.
All right, mates. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you next week. And also look out, gents, on August 25th, I'll have part 2 of my stream with Horace on Britain between 1919 and 1942. So look out for that one. Go well, folks.